In 2024, global leaders are desperately seeking a financial model to fund the green transition, frequently invoking the 1948 Marshall Plan as the ultimate solution for climate-vulnerable nations facing catastrophic economic collapse. The European continent, fragmented by the devastating aftermath of the Second World War, faced a total industrial paralysis that threatened to trigger widespread famine and political instability across the war-torn nations of Western Europe. Before the mid-20th century, European colonial powers extracted immense wealth from the global south, establishing extractive economic systems that left these regions structurally vulnerable to the very climate-driven disasters that now necessitate massive international financial intervention. The Second World War left Europe in ruins, with industrial production plummeting to 70% of pre-war levels by 1946, while millions of displaced persons wandered a continent lacking basic infrastructure, housing, and fuel. Following the total collapse of the Axis powers in 1945, the subsequent geopolitical realignment saw the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as competing superpowers, setting the stage for the Cold War. The map of 1948 shows 16 participating nations, including the United Kingdom, France, and West Germany, all forming the Organization for European Economic Cooperation to manage the influx of American capital. During the 19th century, European industrialization relied heavily on coal and iron, creating a carbon-intensive economic model that now serves as the historical baseline for the climate challenges currently facing the modern global south. The 1948 Economic Cooperation Act, signed by Harry Truman, provided $13.3 billion in aid, which, when adjusted for inflation, represents roughly $170 billion in 2024 currency, primarily directed toward industrial reconstruction. On June 5, 1947, Secretary of State George C. Marshall delivered his landmark Harvard speech, articulating that the United States must assist in the return of normal economic health to the world, without which there could be no political stability. The Marshall Plan functioned as a massive capital injection, with 90% of aid provided as grants, effectively jump-starting European manufacturing and preventing the spread of Soviet influence through the stabilization of fragile domestic markets. Despite warnings from economists about the potential for long-term debt traps, the original plan prioritized rapid infrastructure development, ignoring the environmental consequences of the fossil fuel-heavy industrial growth that defined the post-war European recovery era. The 2022 climate crisis has forced a reckoning, as developing nations in the Caribbean and Southeast Asia face annual losses exceeding $100 billion, highlighting the inadequacy of current international climate finance mechanisms. Comparing the 1948 recovery to modern climate finance reveals a critical divide. The Marshall Plan was a government-to-government security strategy, whereas contemporary climate goals require private sector mobilization and massive, systemic shifts in global energy policy. The human cost of the post-war era was measured in displaced millions and rationed bread, a reality that mirrors the modern plight of climate refugees who are currently being forced from their homes by rising sea levels. At COP27 in 2022, the concept of a Marshall Plan for Climate gained traction, as activists demanded that wealthy nations fulfill historical responsibilities by funding the transition to renewable energy in the global south. Scientific consensus indicates that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius requires an estimated $2.4 trillion in annual investment by 2030, a figure that dwarfs the original Marshall Plan's total four-year expenditure. International agencies like the IMF and World Bank are currently under intense pressure to reform their lending structures, with the Bridgetown Initiative proposing a new framework to provide liquidity to nations hit by climate-linked disasters. The legacy of the Marshall Plan is preserved in museums across Europe, symbolizing the power of coordinated state-led investment, yet it remains a contested historical model due to its specific Cold War geopolitical motivations. A lesser-known fact is that the Marshall Plan required participating nations to share economic data and coordinate trade policies, a level of regional integration that modern climate finance currently lacks on a global scale. Geography dictates that while Europe's recovery was centered on rebuilding existing industrial hubs, the climate crisis requires a decentralized transition, making the one-size-fits-all Marshall Plan analogy structurally complex for diverse global economies. The debate over climate finance is not merely about money, but about the political will to treat the existential threat of climate change with the same urgency and scale as the post-1945 reconstruction of Western Europe. As we look toward the future, the success of any modern climate-focused Marshall Plan will depend on whether global powers can prioritize collective survival over the narrow geopolitical containment strategies that defined the original 1948 economic intervention.